Hey, so we are finally back with the Azad project after a gap of what feels like a really long time.
Yep. And this episode, I think, is going to be a bit of a long one that you're about to listen to.
It's a bit here and there. There is not much structure to it. It was very impromptu. We just wanted to get some content out.
Yeah, and we had a lot of stuff to talk about. So I'm going to read out some of the stuff that we talked about. If you're interested in any of that, listen to the episode. If you're not interested, listen to it anyway. Because it's pretty good. I think we had a really good chat.
I just like to hear us speak, bro.
Yeah, it was fun. All right. In this episode, we're going to cover Netflix, film and movies, religion, spirituality, alienation, witchcraft, colonization, democracy, and freedom.
Damn, that's a lot of topics.
And they all relate to each other too. If that interests you, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Azad Project. Hello and welcome to the Azad Project. I am Mu.
And I'm Rayan.
And it has been a long time since we've done one of these.
Yeah, around almost 2 months.
Something
3
like
months?
that, yeah.
Time doesn't really mean much to us anymore.
Nope, I don't believe in it. I don't want it in my house. No, thank you.
No time in this household. And it is our household now, isn't it, Mo?
That is true. We have moved in together.
Moved in together.
I'm going to edit that out. Yeah, that's our big news. We got an apartment together. Full-time recording studio / chill palace / Antifa HQ.
Antifa HQ, Azadistan, let's go.
It's been interesting considering we've been moving in right in the middle of the lockdown here in Victoria. COVID's gotten pretty bad around here.
Yeah, the last time of our recording, we were out of lockdown and things were starting to look normal.
Yep.
We were out and about. We could see each other.
Yeah, we could hang out. We could
have sessions and all that. But nope, over the past 2 months, things have kind of gotten to the crappers.
Yep.
We are, as of right now, we are in curfew. It is past 8 p.m., so...
We are at home. If the police ask, I'm not visiting a friend. This is my housemate now.
We live together. It finally happened after 3 years
Something
of knowing
like
each
that.
other.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
A long time coming.
But COVID, right? I guess in Australia, we sort of had it better than most until at least the second wave happened.
Yeah.
It hasn't really been that way for so much of the world.
Oh, yeah.
As we speak right now, I was reading the news this morning, which said that Europe's been seeing a little spike. They've had the highest number of cases in recent weeks.
Yeah, okay.
In America, well, I guess America's always been pretty shit, but
Yes.
it's gone from bad to worse.
Gosh.
China, in China, they had a water party DJ thing happen in Wuhan.
Yeah, a little water party rave in Wuhan.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I felt a little salty seeing them have
It's such a flex.
fun.
I'm not
It's
gonna
such
lie,
a big
like
flex.
the city from where the coronavirus came from is out and about having a big water party rave. That is a
Yeah.
big flex.
It kind of stings.
Yeah, we're not having a water party rave here. We are locked up. That's the state of our world. And it was quite a hassle moving in to a new place in the middle of such a lockdown. The benefit being there was nobody on the roads, so that was really nice. Mm-hmm. And since we've moved in, we've just been
chilling.
Yeah, consuming a lot of consumption because there's just not a lot to do anymore.
Consumption and experiences, I'd say.
That's true.
They're not one and the same.
We've been experiencing a lot.
I see, for me, the difference between consumption and experience would be for art, right?
Yeah.
That is something that you experience, whereas crappy reality TV, that is something that you consume.
Yeah, okay.
And entertainment these days, right? I feel like it's just geared towards consumption and not a lot of experiences. And I say that we had a couple of experiences is because we've watched a fair bit of film over the past week.
Yeah, we watched some film.
We saw 2001: A Space Odyssey the other night.
Film.
That was really good. It was beautiful. Taxi Driver, that was nice too.
That was a good film. That was indeed a good film.
And then we also watched Indian Matchmaking.
That's true.
Which was pure consumption.
Consumed other people's experiences there.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. That show gripped me. In a way
Bro,
that I
I'm
did
not
not
gonna
want
pretend
it to.
like I didn't enjoy Indian Matchmaking.
Yeah, no, I was all about it. I think I've watched it 3 times now. I wish I was joking about that.
Oh,
but
man.
that's the state of the world that I live in now.
But that's the thing about consumption, right? It doesn't mean that you're not going to be enjoying the shit that you mindlessly consume.
Of course.
It's designed, so see how Netflix functions and so many of the other things that you're consuming functions is that they trigger the dopamine receptors in your brain, and they essentially trigger happiness and simulate happiness inside your head. But it's not really real, is it?
Well, does it matter? If you can't tell the difference between real happiness and perceived happiness, then like, what is it not real? What is real happiness?
Well,
except
I don't
for
know. Did you
perceiving
feel
happiness,
happy after seeing Indian matchmaking? Do you feel happy after eating McDonald's?
I felt happy watching Nadia and Shaker go on their date, and she was smitten. That was cute. But I mean, to whatever extent that was my own happiness or me living vicariously through someone else's shoes, like I don't know if that's any less happiness,
You're just projecting your happiness onto them?
I was projecting their happiness onto me.
Onto you, yeah.
Yeah, I was like taking it from them. I was sponging it from them.
Just a crumb of dopamine, please.
Just a little bit, please. Netflix has been doing some wacky stuff recently.
Yeah.
I mean, they've produced some really good stuff. We watched Blown Away, the glass-blowing reality competition on Netflix.
That was something.
Which is exhilarating. An exhilarating watch. Highly recommended.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10 from the Azad boys. If you need someone to watch Blown Away, that's our rec.
Well, not all content on Netflix is stellar like Blown Away, right? You get controversies every now and then. For instance, the cutie scandal that's going on right now.
Yeah, that's a big one. A lot of people are ticked off. For some context, earlier this year, a French director named Maïmouna Doucouré.
Beautiful.
Apologies for my French. Pardon my French. I can say that. Released a film earlier this year, actually earlier this month, on 19th of August, called Mignons. Not Minions, that's a different film.
That's a different film.
About a Senegalese immigrant child in France and her struggles with consolidating femininity as displayed to her by a more conservative, traditional religious family that she grows up in an Islamic family, to the over-sexualized femininity of the society around her. That was the premise of the original film. Netflix has taken the film and is releasing it in early September under the name Cuties, and
people have just been getting really mad about that.
Well, I mean, there's a particular reason they're getting mad about it. Mm-hmm. Netflix took the film, they released this gross picture, like promotional poster kind of thing, of all the young girls.
They're all 11-year-olds,
They're all 11-year-olds. The characters and the actresses are all 11-year-old young girls. And they put out this super gross poster of them all, like, looking like...
Twerking.
Yeah, twerking.
So it's not just
sexual.
dancing. Like when we saw the trailer, right? It's a very specific form of dancing. It's just them twerking.
Well, I mean, we didn't see too much dancing in the trailer, so I don't really know. I have not seen the original French film.
Yeah,
I don't know what kind of dancing they do. But the Netflix description for the film focused primarily on twerking, and the picture that they released was pretty, I guess, explicit. It's uncomfortable, incredibly uncomfortable.
But yeah, you don't want to see an 11-year-old doing that.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, because with the way that Netflix marketed it, it's definitely apparent that they're just trying to reach some weird, pervy, pedophilic,
niche.
Lowest common denominator niche of just gross people. Whereas I think the original French film, so like I guess if we're talking about film and movie here, consumption and entertainment, Cuties is something to be consumed by the grossest of people. Mignons, in its intention, is to be a film about the experiences of a Senegalese immigrant. And the director herself is a Senegalese immigrant. So she's writing a story about her own lived experiences, tackling conservative religion with a more free-form society. And it's kind of like a balancing of like... Well,
yeah, I guess anyone who's had to, who grew up or comes from a non-Western background, then moving to the West, essentially, there will always be a dichotomy in their identities, and like there is a reckoning that is to be had about, moving to the West and like transitioning to your lifestyle, like your moral standard and everything's shattering.
Yeah.
So there is a culture shock. The culture shock's very real.
Yeah.
I've experienced it. Like when I moved from Bangladesh to Australia, it's always there.
Yeah, I've been through it myself. It's just the nature of moving around. from a place that isn't really like the homeland of your culture, I guess. Like what you are taught at home and what you are taught outside your home being so different from each other can often be super conflicting and lead to a bit of cognitive dissonance that as a child is really, it's really difficult to consolidate and like just get over and move over and understand. Like, I'm taught this by my mother, but I'm taught this by the people around me. Who do I trust? What is real?
Yeah.
And I think discussing that, especially through the lens of femininity and kind of personal expression, is a really interesting concept.
Well, I mean, we haven't seen Mignons yet.
We've not seen the movie.
But like from what we gathered from the trailer, right? I felt like it was really, other than of course the sexualizing bit of the 11-year-old, because that's just messed up. I thought that the tale itself just would be very compelling.
Yeah.
Because the child comes from a very conservative Senegalese Muslim immigrant background, and then like she just looks out of her window and sees just Western kids living their life and getting to experience the freedoms that her culture, her background doesn't allow for.
Yeah.
And her just like leaving the comfort and the safety net of her home and just pursuing that. I don't know, that tale, like it's kind of like a coming of age tale.
It is a coming of age tale.
Yeah, so like that always captivates me.
Yeah. On the note of that sexualization, I think one of the things that I heard was that was one of the themes of the original film, is that in Europe there is a rampant issue of the sexualization of immigrant children, immigrant female children particularly, and that was something she wanted to cover as well, tackle in that movie. A lot of people are mad about this film.
Yeah, and rightfully so,
yeah.
Really. Like if you've seen the posters, if you've seen the trailer even.
It's clear that their marketing is disgusting. Netflix and what they're trying to get done, it's disgusting. The other group of people who have been particularly really upset are the, I guess, Islamic groups. They don't like the portrayal of Islam in the film. I mean, we're both from Muslim backgrounds. We both come from Islamic households. What do you feel about it?
I feel like the conservatism, which is typically associated with a lot of Muslim audiences, it's very valid and it's very real. Salman Rushdie is one of my favorite authors. He comes from a Muslim background himself. He had this book come out, Satanic Verses, and for that he got fatwas declared against him.
What's a fatwa for people who don't know?
A fatwa is essentially an Islamic verdict, and the particular fatwa that came out against Rushdie was to just kill him because of what he published. So there is definitely a tolerance issue in a lot of Muslim countries, in a lot of Muslim backgrounds. Communities, really. Yeah. A lot of it is cultural.
I mean, that's the interesting thing about Islam, right? Like it is, as a religion, regardless of being like a large organized religion, it is very specific to the culture in which it is practiced. Like my Pakistani Islam in the family that I grew up with was quite different from the Arab Islam of the country that I lived in for a long time. It's interesting how they syncretize with each other. I'm sure you've experienced that as well.
Yeah, like we're both from Muslim backgrounds, but our experiences with Islam would have been very different because you're Pakistani and I am Bangladeshi. So like that makes all the difference.
There's a lot of things people take out of it as well. I'm sure there are many people who will watch the film Cuties or Mignons and completely relate to the situations in which they live. There are a lot of people who are very provocative and self-exploratory, and they're not conservative at all, and they are still Muslim. So there's a lot of different ways that Islam can manifest, and in that way, there's a lot of different ways that religion can manifest in people.
Yeah,
I think an interesting discussion to be had is, what is religion? There's many people who call themselves Muslim. There are many people who adhere to Islam. But they all are very, very different from each other. And it makes you wonder... But they all
prescribe to the Quran as the source of their faith, but their practice is just
But even then, different parts of it. Some people will never read the Quran and still consider themselves Islamic. Some people will believe you can only be a Muslim if you have read the Quran. So when you have so much variety in practitioners of a certain thing, like, what is that thing? How do you define that as one thing, right? When everybody has their own different way of going about it. I think that's true for all religion, right? So, like, what is Islam? What is religion?
Yeah, I guess for me, religion is just codified culture to a certain extent. But at least at the very origins of religion, right? Like if we look back at it, it served a very specific, very important societal role of setting a moral standard and setting the limits and essentially serving as a legal purpose too, like in the sense that these are the things that you can do and these are the things that you can't do. And like back in the day, in ancient societies even, and even in prehistoric ones, you would see like religion have a very strict society serve that role. But through the ages, the function of religion just kept, like religion's scope kept evolving, but its function, I would say, it still remained the same, in the sense that it gave us purpose, it gave us meaning, but also it told us what we can and can't do. You know, we shall not lie. It has been a central theme of almost every religion throughout history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see in the development of kind of religion and the distinction from spirituality into religion. If we're talking about prehistoric and we're talking about the ancient and the classics periods of our history, to see the role that religion plays in deviating, or first in organizing people's spirituality. Like, for instance, you're saying like religion is codified culture. That is like totally true for the Abrahamic religions. The origins of Judaism and the Torah come from the canonization, or like the writing down of the customs and cultures of the Hebrew people and the Jewish people at the time. And that has been like a tradition that has carried on effectively. Religion is just culture codified. Our experience is mainly Abrahamic, so I can't say that. I don't know if that applies like to all religion, like in terms of like, I think of like Nordic pagan religions or even the Hindu pantheon.
I was going to say that even though religion tends to be codified culture, or it incorporates a lot of culture, right? I would say that at least for the Abrahamic religions, particularly Islam, the beginning of the religion is always also an act of rebellion, right? Because you don't just start a religion, because there will always be an existing religion. There is always a status quo. Yep. So when the Prophet Muhammad started Islam, there was substantial opposition. He was going against the culture of Mecca at the time, which was polytheistic. You know, they weren't Muslims from the start. He had to convert them, and that act of conversion itself was inherently rebellious, but also inherently political. So that's the other aspect of religion for me. It's the politics that's involved and embedded in the structures of religion.
Yeah, and you do see that pretty much everywhere in the world. The use of religion as a legitimizer for monarchs, for war, for claims on land. Religion has often been used in that very like explicitly political purpose, not just for political organizing, like under the beginnings of Islam, but for individuals to utilize to gain their own political power and to allow themselves a justification for pretty reprehensible acts. Yeah, I mean, I think you could not have the beginnings of colonization without Christianity, without those missionaries who were the first peoples to come and interact with native peoples around the world. Those missionary efforts were the precursor to a lot of colonization in a lot of ways as well. I think before we go like forward with religion, and like I'd like to go kind of backwards and draw a line between religion and spirituality and see like what are the differences between those two things. Yeah, so I'd like to draw a distinction between those two things and find maybe the overlaps as well between those two things.
Yeah.
Where do you see those two things?
I think for me, spirituality is a lot more abstract, whereas religion would be a lot more concrete. See, for spiritual, like religion is very structured, and in the sense that it has it has laws and rules. It'll have a canon in a lot of cases, and it doesn't really deviate, or mainstream Orthodox religions wouldn't deviate from what is set in stone. Yep. Whereas spirituality, I feel like, is definitely an aspect of religion, but if we were drawing Venn diagrams, they wouldn't be a circle. Yeah. So like spirituality can exist beyond religion, and I feel very strongly about this actually, because I feel like religion tends to have a monopoly on spirituality. Yeah. And that a lot of discussions about spirituality tends to happen through the lens of religion. But like I think spirituality can definitely exist without it. Definitions are a little tricky here because it's so subjective, and every person I think has their own understanding of spirituality. But for me, it's a connection to anything bigger than yourself and anything that isn't strictly explained through, and I'm doing air quotes here, rational sciences, rational heart sciences.
Yeah.
So how you understand your place in the universe. It can be through a god, it can be through multiple gods, it can be through the devil. So a being or not, it doesn't have to be
totally.
a specific thing.
I remember we were watching not too long ago a video about different kind of occultic beliefs, different kinds of
the black magic.
we're talking about the history of magic, right?
Yeah.
And one of the cultures that was brought up believed that every death that occurred for some purpose, some reason, right? The example that was brought up was there was a man who was killed in an accident when a windmill fell on top of him, something like that. And the people, they saw, the oak had decayed under the windmill. It was going to fall over. The question was never like, oh, he died because of this. The question was, why was he there when he was? What put him there in that moment that would kill him, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, so for me, with my experiences with religion and with science, I was Muslim. I grew up in a very Muslim household. Then I became what we call now a neo-atheist, this new generation of atheists that came out in the kind of mid-2010s. And a lot of it was heavily influenced by anti-SJW YouTubers. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, late-stage Christopher Hitchens when he became a neoconservative.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. to the good Christopher Hitchens. I'm so sorry you existed to the late-stage Christopher Hitchens. Anyway, without getting too dorky about it, I'm sure you've all experienced those really ridiculous neckbeard fedora atheists. And that's the tradition that I grew up. That was where I went to after being religious. And what you learn in those circles is we only needed religion because we didn't have science.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know how the moon worked, so we needed to give it a god instead. And I think that's such a ridiculous way to believe in religion because that's just not the role of it, right? Spirituality isn't about how does this mechanically function. Spirituality is about why. And what can I do with that information?
Yeah.
How does that actually affect me? Knowing that the moon pulls the tides doesn't really mean anything mechanically. It's more about what's the bigger picture of it. That's the question spirituality answers.
Yeah.
And that religion tries to fill, I believe.
I think I shared that skeptical and reductive approach to understanding religion too, to an extent, where I would just because there are definitely parallels between religion and science for me. Yeah. I've always thought that epistemologically, right, in the way science and religion understands itself and its goal even are very similar in the sense that it just tries to make sense of the world around it. That point about the moon, we didn't understand what it is, so we name it the moon god and try to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Sure, that in that regard, science and religion share that similarity, and in that neo-atheist outlook, since we have better science now, we just get rid of religion.
Yeah.
But is that all the purpose of religion? Is that the only function of religion? I don't think so. That is just the strict rational aspect of religion. But to me, there's a deeper spiritual bit of religion that science simply doesn't have.
Yeah.
I used to be a Nietzschean, and I would be very I was a nihilist, and to a certain extent I still am. And for me, I think that whole God is dead fallacy, where you just think that, okay, we have had the Enlightenment, we know things now, we are rational beings.
Yep.
So, and we don't have a need for morality, and we don't really need anything bigger that we don't have to dream up fictional creatures to not kill each other.
We don't need faith anymore.
Yeah, we don't need faith anymore because we have the social contract. We have society which will prevent us from lying to each other or from killing each other. We don't need a god to tell us that. I feel even then, in this late stage abstract capitalist hellscape that we live under, there is no sure, I don't think we have a need for a moral framework as rigid as religion, but I think spirituality is as important, if not more important, right now than ever before.
Yeah.
Just because of the fact that we're so alienated from other people in our communities, from each other, from our own selves even, right? And I think spirituality can be a great way of understanding our place in not only this universe, but also like where we stand within society itself.
Yeah, I want to kind of talk about that point actually about like the alienation of people, because I've spent the last few months kind of just developing my own framework of reality and understanding like what is the world, because like I mentioned earlier, I don't believe in time anymore. So if there is no time, what does that mean?
Wait, what do you mean when you say you don't?
When I say I don't believe in time anymore, what I mean is objectively there is no past or future. Mm-hmm. The only moment of existence is literally right now. Always the right now. Anything outside of the right now doesn't exist. It has no empirical effect on us at all. The moon yesterday is not controlling the tides right now.
But of course, right? But do you not believe in history then?
Well, that's the thing. I don't believe in an objective history. I believe all we can ever know about the past is whatever we can interpret from what is in this moment right now. That means every single individual can interpret things in their own unique way. The question is, why do we have knowledge? Why do we have facts, right? If everything is completely subjective, how do we know anything, right? The only way that we know things is when we agree with each other and we validate each other. And we have to sometimes give authority to people above us, not in terms of elitism or anything, but in terms of knowledge and awareness. Like, for instance, I've never seen the globe, but I don't believe the earth is flat. Yeah. Because I give my trust to the scientific authorities who know better than me, right? So
that's almost, I'm sorry to cut you off, but like that belief, right? Like you assigning that authoritative figure the authority to essentially say that, okay, this is that.
Yes.
It's religious, right?
That's faith. You have to have faith in something. To have nothing at all means you can never validate how you see the world to be. You will always be alone in your own reality. You'll never be able to confirm it with anybody else. So one of the implications of that, like of my way of thinking, is that you need community. You need society, right? That's why having our own kind of cultures are important, because culture is just group validation of beliefs and values, right? It's just everybody in a certain area, region, or even spread out around the world now because of the world that we live in, agreeing with each other about certain truths. And that validation keeps us sane. It keeps us going forward. Because without it, we're literally just waddling around in the darkness. We are just in the cave of Plato looking at shadows, trying to interpret shit by ourselves. Mm-hmm. You can't achieve anything by that, right? Anyway, so to round this back to what we were talking about, under capitalism, because we're all so alienated all the time, and I've been feeling that especially during this lockdown, man.
Oh yeah, totally.
There's a lot of loneliness to it. Being away from people, that's not how human beings can function.
That's not what we've evolved to function as.
And I think one of the ways you see that manifested most violently when you see the school shooters in the States, or the people, or the guy who shot up the Pulse nightclub. Mm-hmm. When you see these people who do these heinous acts of extreme violence to their communities, these are people who were very isolated and alienated. These are people who did not have contact with their communities. They lived alone and they felt excluded from their communities, right? It is in those moments of complete isolation that people do heinous shit. People do ridiculous shit. Because they do feel alone, they do feel alienated.
And the other side of that is that, of course, the alienation driving them to that extent, but a lot of people will argue that they are mentally ill and they have illnesses which compel them to do that.
Yep.
And the counter to that is that I really believe that a lot of the mental illnesses that we have today are just manifestations of the alienation that we experience today in our societies, because again, we haven't evolved to function as individual units living our lives in these concrete apartment building blocks, and just not interacting with people at all, and like not being in a community. Like millions of years of evolution has led us to that point. And
even more than that, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I hate naturalistic biological arguments about evolution. I think the anthropological argument is more sufficient in this case. Like, we only exist in the way we do now because society, because community, right? Like, we learned, I think these are lessons learned more than biological instincts. Like,
so you're taking the more nurture approach.
Well, yeah, more or less. I just don't like naturalistic arguments. I think those have led to, like, that line of thinking has led to genocides, eugenics, whatnot. Naturalism generally, I think, is a very dangerous thing to use as a principle for understanding where we are now. When the anthropological argument is just as valid and makes just as much sense of the reasoning.
I guess, I didn't really mean to make a naturalistic argument, but more of a neurological one.
Yeah.
In the sense that our brains are wired like a certain way.
Yeah.
And like just these conditions, because of the nurture aspect of it, are just not suitable for like, fully realizing what like our potential or whatever.
I mean, for lack of a better word, we are going against our own nature by being so alone in the society that we live in. But I mean, that's not an accident of capitalism. That's the intention of it, is to break you down.
Yeah, I mean, one of Marx's most famous bits is his critiques about capitalism's alienating aspect, right? And how labor is essentially estranged in the form that you are so, like, you are all working by yourselves, performing a very specific function, and because of that, you don't really get to interact with other members in your own society, and you are therefore just living by yourself while existing in this society, which is just such a paradoxical notion to me.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of Marx, so we talked a bit about the neo-atheist like definition of religion as kind of like a bench filler for or a bench warmer for science. Like it was just taking its place until science took the picture. Marx has his own defining characteristic or definition of religion. I'm sure people have heard the quote, "Religion is the opium of the masses." Really what Marx says about religion is that, and he's talking particularly about the Abrahamic religions and the kind of the Protestant Christianity that was around at the time. He's talking about the proletariat class, the people who do the work and don't own anything. The serfs. And the serfs will live their entire life just working, never having anything to show for it. They're just machines to produce for someone above them. In that situation where you as an individual live your entire life and never get anything from it, religion offered to those people the ability to do nothing more than they were already doing. Staying humble, loving your neighbor, caring for your sick, caring for your children. Just do what you already do, and you will be granted the kingdom of heaven. You will be given something for your efforts, right? That idea, I think there's a lot of validity to that. I think like that does touch on what the role of spirituality and religion is in terms of providing meaning to people. And I think there's a benefit and a danger to that. And what I mean is, I think it's important for people to have a reason to be doing what they're doing. So if I woke up every day believing that everything is completely meaningless and there's no purpose in anything I'm doing, I'd probably jump off a cliff. Like, if you go every day of your life not understanding why you're doing anything, you feel the like meaninglessness, Religion can help alleviate some of that. The other problem with it though is I believe that form of meaninglessness and hopelessness is an important historical thing, right? Like I think when a lot of people feel like they don't understand at all why the world is how it is, and they feel like they should do something about it, then they typically do something about it. Example, the French Revolution. When you see the king constantly spending money on lavish parties and whatnot, and they're taxing you to the point that you have nothing to show for it, you're going to ask, why is this the way that it is? And when you realize there is no answer to that question, you will act on it. I think one of the dangers of religion, particularly the Abrahamic religions, has been its ability to just make us stop questioning, can we change things? Like, I think that's more of a historical thing than a current thing. But I imagine,
I think more so in modernity, it takes on that route.
We talk about the Protestant work ethic and whatnot, like, to just work, and that's like a backbone of capitalism.
And I think for me, that's the third aspect of religion. So we talked about the cultural part, then we talked about the spiritual part, and then now for the other part is the ideological aspect of it, which is, religion sort of serves the role of dociling the masses by essentially telling them that, you have the afterlife to look forward to. So suffer in this life, dear Muslim or dear Christian, and in eternity you shall enjoy the heavens or whatever. I don't know my scripture. But so essentially that is a very dangerous notion, because you are living in the now, but you're not, right? You are essentially hedging all your bets on like the afterlife. And I don't want to be making a theocratic argument here because that's redundant, but like in terms of what we have in the now, in terms of our material realities, you just accept your realities as it is. You suffer and like repent and ask for forgiveness, but you never choose to challenge the status quo. You never choose to challenge the elites, because that is how God made it. And that is how God made things to be.
I think the important thing as well, like when we're talking about like very kind of big structural things, right? Like it's not true for everybody. For example, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Like, you know, there are people of religion who do strive for real change because they don't just buy into the whole, I'll suffer now and be rewarded for it later. They do want to see real change. So when we're talking about religion in this way, it's not to say that every person who believes this thing. It's to say that generally, on average, as a structure, over the course of history and everybody who's believed, religion has had that dociling or dosifying, or it's made people keep their shit together when they should let their shit go.
Yeah. So that's what Marx means when he says that religion is the opium of the masses, right? Yeah. That line is taken out of context and misinterpreted a lot in leftist circles. He didn't really mean that, religion is a drug and the masses are intoxicated in it. No, he essentially meant that religion is all they have under capitalism, because capitalism strips away everything else. So they have to put all their beliefs behind the ideas of religion, because otherwise they have nothing.
Yeah, they've got nothing at all. Okay, so I'm curious about how you feel about witches. We were talking about magic a bit earlier, and it's been really interesting. Like when I was a neo-atheist, like in my old days, if I heard like, there are witches on Twitter and they cursed the moon, I would laugh. I'd say, the SJWs have gone too far. Feminism needs to calm down a little bit. I would think it's an irrational, unrealistic, and unnecessary thing that's happening. I don't really feel that way about it right now. I am at a point in my life where I'm no less scientific, I'd say, than I was when I was a neo-atheist. I still have a lot of value. I treasure the sciences for what they have provided for us. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I can say 100% for sure that the baby witches on TikTok didn't hex the moon and that Apollo's not pissed off about it. Like, I can't say for sure that I don't know that to be true. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
I'm a bit of an agnost about that now, where I wasn't before. I'm curious how you feel about witches and magic in today's day.
Look, for me, I think if I was the old me, would be very dismissive and would just laugh it off, and I think old me and old you would just have like a laugh about it. Yeah. But I really don't feel that way because of how I think of spirituality now, and I think spirituality is very fluid and it should be a very personal thing. So if you want to hex the moon, by all means, go ahead. It's not, I don't believe in that thing in particular. That's not how I understand spirituality or magic or like the great power out there. But I think it is perfectly rational to be believing so. And like, the autonomy, because that's what it comes down to, right? Like if you want to believe it, that you're a witch, by all means, you should have the autonomy to do so, as long as you're not causing harm.
Some of them, well, that's the thing. By hexing the moon, they were causing harm. That's the danger. See, I bring up witches for a particular reason, right? I think spirituality can provide answers for a lot of things, but magic is a particular form of spirituality that I think is intriguing because it promises an actual active output. Like, it's not just believing in something; it's an actual practice that has real world effects, right? Like, it's more than just individual subjective feelings. Like, we all kind of believe in some kind of magic. There's an organization to the belief system of it. They believe in the exact same gods. They believe in the effects of it all, right? These aren't just individuals who believe that they have answers to things in their own subjective ways. There is an organization to witchery. Is witchery a religion? Or is it spirituality?
I think for me, magic is, like, I'll talk about magic more broadly instead of just witchery, because magic's super interesting to me, because to me, it sort of weaponizes spirituality in the sense where it gives agency to those who don't really have active political power or social power or whatever in the abstract terms. Because if we think about voodoo in particular, right? Like voodoo originated from West African slaves in the Americas as a way of understanding their position in society. And you, like, whether or not magic is real is beside the point.
Yep.
For me, it is the practice of magic, right? You practice magic when you are trying to change the outcome of the status quo. And that itself seems very rebellious and revolutionary to me. And I vibe with that.
Yeah,
you know, if you're trying to hex the moon and challenge the elites, by all means, go ahead. So I think it's really dope.
Yeah. I think I think overall my feelings towards magic and like the way that it has become today, which is quite distinct from I think how it's been in different anthropological areas throughout history, but like today's magic and all that, and then the witches movements and all that, hell yeah, like go for it. I'm down for it. The Azad project supports witching in all of its forms. You know, just take care of each other, love each other. If you want to do a freezer spell, you know, do it on Boris Johnson, do it on Donald Trump, do it on Scott Morrison.
If you want to curse Joe Biden, by all means,
please curse Joe Biden, curse Kamala Harris. Just let's take down the fascists, you know. And if the witches want to help, hell yeah. Come on board. I'm all for it.
We could use all the spells we can get. See, I'm just very tired of the West in general, but in particular Western rationality, which would be so dismissive of, like, you know, anything that deviates from their understanding of the world and their sciences.
Yeah.
Fuck the West and fuck their knowledge systems for being so elitist and so reductionary for anything that's indigenous to anywhere outside of Europe. You know, cultures around the world have had magic, have had spirituality, and have had religions, which they've understood and made sense of their world in their own ways. But the fucking white man comes along in their big colonizer boats and they just say nothing else matters and that there is only one God and his name is Jesus.
Yep.
And you shall now restructure your economy to align to the white man's ways and you will be exploited by them.
Yeah,
fuck that.
Dude, Western universalism is just a super dangerous concept. And by that what I mean is kind of the idea that there is some objectivity to the subjective things in our lives, like
that
morals,
all humans
values,
are the same,
beliefs.
And that all human experiences are essentially the same.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one of the other reasons I hate liberalism so much, because liberalism essentially builds off of the idea of universalism, where it really thinks that all men are equal, and of course all people are equal, right?
Yeah.
But like liberalism in its assertion essentially says that all men being equal means that all our experiences, however different that they may be, are redundant because we are the same, and therefore we shall have the same institutions, the same political system, the same culture as its end product. Fuck that.
Yeah.
You know, like we are here in Australia in so-called Australia and stolen Aboriginal land. If we look in the trajectory of Aboriginal history, right, which dates back tens of thousands of years ago, their historical experiences are so much more different from that of Western Europe, of the British colonizers who asserted their culture here, right?
Yep.
So like, why would liberal universalist principles ever be applicable to a very specific group of people who have had vastly different historical experiences?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's completely true as observable fact in any nation that has undergone colonization. You know, like we both come from colonized lands. We're currently in colonized lands. And if you speak to people who are children of colonization like we are, and that, like we talked about with cuties, right? Mm-hmm. That idea of like what I'm taught at home and what I see in the world around me being so different, that can be really dangerous and hurtful, I think, to a lot of people, because you don't know how to consolidate it. You don't know which to give more value to. Because I think of liberal universalism, you don't really give value to your own lived experiences. You give almost too much faith and trust into the system. You don't trust your own lived experiences. Now, to do that, not just to a young immigrant child, to do that to an entire nation of people, to take away all of their history, all of their organic development, and to institute your own institutions, your own economics, your own values, your own religion on top of everything they've built throughout their history, to erase their history and give them your history.
That's just pure evil,
it's
right?
Literally the most evil thing. And I've said this before. I don't know if this is going to go on the podcast or not, but I've said this before. If it wasn't for Nazi Germany, we would easily accept the UK and the US to be the two most evil powers on this planet's history. And so Ray and I had this discussion like not too long ago about the difference between empire and colonization, because I think it's easy to say like, oh, colonization is just the inevitable next step of empire. It's just doing empire but bigger. But it's really not. There's a big difference between it. When you are an empire and you're growing bigger, you're not just taking lands to exploit the land and the resources. You are building on that land. You are implementing your own cultures with the people who are already there, at risk of all of that crumbling away. It's very easy for empires to crumble when they're just stuck together by roads, literally just like road connections. The difference between something like the Mongols and the Roman Empire and the British Empire is that they were explicitly taking land to exploit labor and resources, to draw it out, and to institute their own beliefs on top of it. It is so dehumanizing.
It's dehumanizing, and it's purely just extraction, right?
Yeah.
Like colonization only happened for the betterment of the British people, in particular the English people, and everyone else were just their subjects, and like, you know, they were just commodities waiting to be exploited for their own gain.
Yeah, and the most disgusting legacy of colonization, oh, maybe not the most, every part of the legacy is so disgusting. But to me, the idea that Britain takes over, you know, India, takes over Australia, takes over half the world, pretty much, extracts all that wealth, puts it into their own nation. They literally take all of the resources they can get from all these lands, right? And then after these lands are emancipated, you know,
air quotes here,
air quotes, decolonized air quotes, they have the nerve to call these places developing countries. Because they literally stopped the flow of their own development and history, took all the value and put it in their own nation, and they have the fucking nerve to say these nations are developing.
That they're dirt poor and they're riddled with poverty, and that they need the white man to swoop in and help and aid their development. Fuck that, bitch. Give us back what you took from us.
Yeah, man.
Give us the reparations. Like, that's just, it's messed up. Dude, I just want to see the British Museum burn.
Yeah.
But not the artifacts, just the institution.
Just the institution of it.
Yeah, just the
burn
institution.
Burn figuratively.
Yeah.
And then once the artifacts have been removed, burn literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, fire's cool. Fire's cool, man.
Fire's cool.
Like, guys, listeners, let's acknowledge this, okay? Fire's cool, man. Burning shit, cool. That's awesome, bro. That's lit. Like, literally.
Quite literally.
Fucking just go for it. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Burn the empire, question mark?
Oh, burn it all, man. If you get your hands on the queen, fucking burn her. Like, I'm saying, let's get stakes up. Like, well, you know, like, and we'll let the witches do it as well, if they want to do it. If they want to do it, because I don't want to like appropriate like terrible things they've gone through. If the witches want to burn the queen, go for it. I'm all for it. I think the other thing as well is like, especially white people, especially who are listening, right? Colonization never stopped. I think like that's something that is really just obvious to us, but I think for most people, you know, the British Raj doesn't exist anymore, therefore colonization over. I think the idea of as soon as the British have left, we are now no longer colonized is such a ridiculously stupid notion. Our cultures now will never be detached from colonization. The world that my parents have grown up in, the language, the culture, the values of my people will always be stained by that legacy, right? There is no Pakistan without colonization. There's no India without colonization. Just because the British have left, the project has definitely not ended. Right? I think that's something that a lot of people who don't live in these areas or don't really understand what it means to be part of these areas, they'll never understand that things have impacts. History has recurring effects.
See, here's the other thing, right? Like you say that white people don't know that, but I feel like a lot of people living in these countries don't even realize that too, because part of the colonial project is to erase history. So a lot of people, like a lot of Pakistanis, a lot of Indians, they believe in the colonial myth of India. And they prescribe to that myth, and then they go to war for that myth.
Yeah.
You know, but at the end of the day, India, Pakistan, these are inherently colonial constructs. There would be no India without colonialism. There would be like separate nations of like, you know, India as it stands right now, it's got so many different ethnicities, but there is no self-determination because of the monstrosity that is the Indian state. And I mean, I talk about this a lot, but like, I mean, not on the podcast, but like the reason why we see fascism in India right now under Modi and the BJP is because of like the only thing that they have going for India and the only thing that unifies India to any meaningful extent, as of right now, is Hinduism, because the majority of people prescribe to Hinduism. But even then, there's just so much differences that exist within these people. You know, and if there wasn't Hindutva nationalism in India, there wouldn't be an India right now. Because otherwise, you either have fascism or you have Congress's liberalism, which is essentially just a muddled down version of whatever.
Yeah, I mean, liberalism is just fascism, but earlier. Yeah, I mean, okay, so that leads to another thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently, which is just democracy in general. And I think the left, to whatever extent it is a thing, needs to really work out what values it wants to keep and which ones it wants to get rid of. And one of the ones I would put on the chopping block is the idea of democracy. I think it's a ridiculous kind of notion that you can have an incredibly large group of people, let each of them put their best interest forward, and somehow that will lead to the best outcome for everybody. All you're doing, and I'm thinking about India here because we were just talking about it. In the case of India, where you have so many ethnic, religious groups spread out over a huge area of land.
Over 1 billion people.
What you are saying with the idea of quote-unquote democracy is that the majority of people, being Hindus, they will have the say over the livelihoods of every group of people, because they just happen to be the largest majority of people. Democracy is nothing more than the dictatorship of the majority. That means when you're looking at trying to solve issues for people like trans people, when you're looking at smaller, like literally minority groups, like when you're looking at any group that is in the minority, you are saying by being so fetishistic of democracy that just put your best interest forward, and maybe if you beg the majority, some of them will put your best interest forward on their behalf.
But when you say you're against democracy, I think it's like you're against democracy in this example, right? In this scenario, in the nation state.
Right?
But like, of course, anything, like to me, I think democracy is integral to leftism, because I feel like, but not in the sense that it's a billion people deciding, and like if 501...
Yeah, of course. On federal level, it doesn't make sense whatsoever.
It doesn't make any sense.
But I'm not completely, like, I think there's a difference between democracy and consensus. I think democracy is to say that we don't have a conversation with each other. I put my best interest forward, you put your best interest forward, and the most people's best interest will represent everyone's best interest. That is democracy, right? I think that's very different from, like, for me, I think the best structure of governance would be council level consensus and communal consensus.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Like, we want that kind of democracy. You know, the revolution would be inherently democratic.
But I don't think democracy is. I don't think that is democracy what you're talking about. You're talking about consensus. The revolution will not be democratic, it'll be consensual.
Well, democracy simply just means like you do what the majority wants, and I think it's very context driven. In democracy under like liberal capitalism means a very specific thing. Like democracy under electoralism means a very specific thing, but also in democracy in mass movement means a completely other thing, where like, you know, if we're in a protest, if we have democracy, like the majority of the protesters get to decide the outcome of that protest.
But that's not healthy still, though. Because again, you're just giving dictatorship to the majority in all situations. There's no way for the minority in any situation to ever have a real say, except for through consensus, which is different from democracy.
Yeah, ideally consensus-driven policy making is the way to go, because it just allows for consent, right? Like consensual rule is what we want. But I think, like, even then, democracy has the appeal of just appealing to the most people.
Of course.
But so I guess we will have a bit of a disagreement in the sense that I think democracy should exist in the most bottom-up grassroots level, and like, but from there, everything else has to be consensus-driven and consent-based.
Yeah, okay. I think democracy, any situation where the majority always has power over the minority is authoritarian by nature and should be removed. Fundamentally, I believe that democracy in any form is an authoritarian construct, is a liberal delusion, and consensus and coming together and talking is a different thing to democracy. And like, we try to put the two of them together in our liberal democracies now, where you do try to talk to people about your politics and you try to work out the best option together. I think the idea of party politics comes out of the idea of having democracy plus having consensus, and we've seen how well party politics has worked on this planet, it has achieved nothing whatsoever. So I think democracy in all of its forms needs to be heavily reconsidered by the left. Consensus as a different thing is what we should really be focusing on as leftists. And to go off of that, I think one more liberal delusion that we need to talk about is freedom. And in the sense of that, what I mean is like the American freedom, you know?
Oh,
like,
yeah. Totally.
Like freedom, like freedom under capitalism, like okay. So
dude, that's just neocolonialism.
It's just neocolonialism.
Like imperialism to the max extent. Like you just think that everywhere else in the world people aren't free because they don't prescribe to your very specific liberal mythology.
Totally.
And that's why you just go export your brand of freedom by essentially subjugating the masses elsewhere and starting endless wars. That's fucked up.
I think under liberalism and capitalism particularly, but under any form of liberalism, freedom is a zero-sum commodity, meaning that if I have freedom, it's because it was taken from someone else. So under capitalism, and we've talked about this before, if you're not working, you are starving and you are dying. That's effectively the way that capitalism is designed to function. Unless you're privileged, unless you have some level of governmental provision and welfareism and whatever. The basic principle of capitalism is you work or you starve. When you live in that system, it does not matter how many options of toothpaste you get at the store.
Toilet paper,
it doesn't matter how many toilet paper rolls you get, because we saw a lot of toilet paper at the store yesterday. It doesn't matter how much fucking cereal you can get your hands on.
This isn't freedom.
That's not freedom. And if it requires homelessness and poverty and the exploitation of the entire fucking global south for
and
you to have your cereal,
and its resources,
you are not free. No one is free. That is fascism. Azad, right?
Because I mean, freedom is super important to us. Like
freedom
Azad literally means freedom.
Freedom.
And so like the Azad project is all about freedom. We're not gonna shit over it, but we're just shitting over the very liberal mythology of freedom.
What we call freedom.
But like,
but Azad's a kind of particular kind of freedom, right? Like, what kind of freedom is Azad?
Azad's freedom from oppression in particular. So like for me, Azadi, which just means to be free, is everything. We need to venture towards Azadi. And like, I choose leftism to get us there because that's the most practical, the most pragmatic, and the most rational approach for me. But like, you don't really need a label to get towards freedom, because I think we are beyond that at this point, right? Like, it's Azadi means freedom from oppression. You see oppression, just try to free yourself from it.
Yeah, more than that, do whatever you can to free everybody from it. Mm-hmm. Because as long as one of us is oppressed, we're not free. We're not Azad. You know, and that is the project. That is the project, is to free us from oppression. Freedom, if freedom needs other people to suffer, it's not freedom. That is a delusion. That you are delusional if you believe that.
It's not called the Delusion Project. It's the Azad
This is the Azad Project, because we want to have people be free from oppression, from tyranny. Wow, that was a lot of stuff.
That was a lot of stuff.
Wow, this is going to be very irritating to listen to if you're into structure and if you're into like a proper formed argument. But we've been off for a long time. We got a lot of stuff on our minds.
We needed to get back on it, and we had a lot on our minds. Yeah. And we have these conversations all the time, I guess. Yeah. But like this time, we just left the microphone on.
Now that we live together, you know, we're gonna have a lot of stuff that we're talking about that we just wish we had microphones on for.
A lot of the things that you'd have to be there for, but well.
Yeah, what we're gonna start doing is just keeping microphones in all the rooms, secretly recording ourselves, and we'll upload those as little snippets for the pod. Hey, Bray, it's been good doing this again, man.
It's good to be back.
Now that, expect more. I'd like to apologize just for our inconsistency in uploading, but hey, we live together now. We'll get more stuff out pretty frequently. If you want to stay up to date, follow us on our socials.
Mm-hmm. And in our last episode, we promised that we'll be doing the mini explainer video things. Yeah. We're gonna get back on that.
Yeah, we'll start getting that together. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at the Azad Project.
Send us what you think.
And Instagram. We put polls up every now and then, so talk to us. We'll talk to you. If you want us to focus on a particular topic, because if you don't give us a topic to focus on, we're going to talk about everything.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to hear us, because we're capable of talking about one thing for an hour, if you want us to. So if you have an idea, send it through to our socials. We'll get on it straight away. So before we wrap up, gosh, colonization gets me heated up. Before we wrap up, I just want to acknowledge that we are not in Australia. We are on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and we would like to show our appreciation for the traditional custodians of the land. Sovereignty was never ceded. We are currently in an occupied state. We are at a constant state of violence. This is scary. People should be scared. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you for having us. I'm sorry that I'm here. With that, thank you for listening to the Azad Project. I've been Moo.
And I'm Rayan.